My name is Olivia, and I am 28 years old. 7 days before my wedding, my mother sat at our kitchen island in Alabama and told me my $20,000 wedding fund was gone. She did not lose it. She gave it to my younger brother for a down payment on a luxury SUV because he needed to look the part for a new sales job. She looked right at my fiancé, Julian, a man she thought was just a mid-level administrative assistant in a faded flannel shirt, and told me I was marrying a nobody anyway. Cancel the caterer, she said. Order pizzas. But when my wedding day actually arrived, my parents did not walk into a public park. They walked through the wrought iron gates of a $50 million coastal estate. And when my father rushed forward to walk me down the aisle, the billionaire CEO of his own company stepped out of the shadows and blocked his path. Before we get into this, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Ava Tells Stories, but only if this story truly resonates with you. And drop your age, location, and local time in the comments. I want to know where you are right now. Now let me take you back to that humid July afternoon to a kitchen in Hoover, Alabama, and the moment 28 years of family loyalty shattered. The ceiling fan ticked a steady, lethargic rhythm, doing little to cut the heat pressing against the window panes. Spread across the granite island were my vendor contracts, final invoices, and my laptop. The math was simple. I needed to transfer the final catering deposit by noon. I logged into the joint account I had shared with my parents since I was 16. I had fed that account, bagging groceries at the local supermarket, and later funneling portions of my supply chain manager's salary into it. My parents had promised to match my contributions, building that $20,000 fund. It was a point of pride for my father, Richard, a grand gesture he liked to drop casually during his corporate golf outings. I hit refresh on the browser. The balance read 0. My mother, Helen, stood by the sink stirring a pitcher of sweet tea. Ice clinked sharply against the glass. "The transfer declined," I said, keeping my gaze locked on the glowing screen. "The account is empty." Helen did not turn around. She poured a glass of tea, condensation slipping over her manicured fingers. "I meant to tell you about that. We had to reroute those funds." I stopped typing. The quiet in the room thickened. "Reroute them where?" She took a measured sip, leaning against the counter. "Tyler starts that new medical sales job on Monday. He cannot pull up to clinics in his old Civic, Olivia. It sends the wrong message to his clients. We use the account for a down payment on a Range Rover. My younger brother, the 24-year-old who had changed majors 4 times, accumulated quiet debts, and left me to negotiate his broken apartment lease just 10 months ago. You bought Tyler a luxury vehicle with my wedding money," I stated. A ledger entry. A fact. Helen sighed. The sound carried a familiar, worn patience, as if she were speaking to a child failing to grasp basic addition. "Be practical. You are marrying Julian. He is an administrative assistant. He wears flannel to dinner. You do not need a high-end reception for a nobody. Call the venue, scale it back. Order some flatbreads from that place downtown. People will find it charming." I looked at Julian. He sat on the bar stool beside me, wearing the exact blue flannel my mother despised. His hands rested on the marble edge. They were rough, calloused near the knuckles. He did not flinch at the word nobody. Instead, his posture seemed to settle. For 28 years, I had functioned as the family shock absorber. I paid the forgotten utility bills, covered Tyler and his overdrafts, and absorbed the critiques about my own ambitions while my father bragged about his regional director title at Vanguard Logistics. I expected familiar anger to surface. Yet sitting in that suffocating heat, I felt only a cold, sharp clarity. Before I could close the laptop, Julian placed his hand over mine. The weight of his palm steadied my fingers. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his thumb hovering over the screen. He tilted his head, catching my eye. A subtle, unfamiliar smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Let them keep the money, Liv," he murmured, his voice low enough that the fan masked it from my mother. "The real wedding is just starting." I closed the laptop, leaving the vendor contracts scattered across the granite island. My mother offered another glass of sweet tea as if she had just suggested a different color scheme for the napkins, rather than detonating my financial reality. I declined, grabbed my keys, and walked out the front door. Julian followed right behind me, his footsteps steady on the porch stairs. The drive back to our second-floor apartment was heavy with unsaid things. As a supply chain manager, my brain defaults to logistics. I spend my days tracking freight, negotiating vendor contracts, and mitigating disasters when shipping routes collapse. I fix broken systems for a living. But sitting in the passenger seat of my 10-year-old sedan, watching the Alabama pines blur past the window, I realized my family was a system I could never fix. For years, I had played the silent benefactor. When Tyler wrecked his credit score during his sophomore year with a trip to Miami, I paid the collections agency. When he needed first and last month's rent for a downtown loft because he quit his job, I wrote the check to the landlord. My father, Richard, the regional director at Vanguard Logistics, always called these incidents minor bumps on the road to greatness. He constantly praised Tyler and his limitless potential, while treating my corporate promotions as standard expectations. My father viewed Tyler and his reckless spending as high-level networking. He viewed my stability as boring. We walked into our apartment. Cardboard boxes of wedding favors sat stacked in the corner, mocking me. I did not cry. Crying requires a sense of loss, and right now, I only felt a cold, surgical detachment. I pulled out my phone and dialed the local community center. I spoke to the venue manager, surrendered our initial deposit, and formally canceled the modest reception hall we had booked 14 months ago. Then I opened the family group chat. The message needed to be brief and devoid of emotion. I typed that, due to unforeseen budget changes, the wedding was scaling down to a quick ceremony at Centennial Park this Saturday afternoon. No reception to follow. I hit send and tossed the phone onto the cushion. Less than 2 minutes later, the screen lit up. It was not an apology from my father. It was not a sympathetic call from my mother. It was a text from Tyler. Grass is going to ruin my new Prada loafers. Can you lay down a runner or something? The sheer audacity of his request acted like a spark in a dry forest. He had just financed a luxury vehicle with my savings, and his primary concern was the morning dew on his designer shoes. The message fueled my focus. I picked up the phone and replied with a simple thumbs up emoji. Let them believe they had won. Let them think I was quietly accepting my role as the defeated background character in their lives. Julian handed me a glass of water. He had already pulled a canvas duffel bag from the hall closet and was tossing a few changes of clothes inside. We did not discuss a plan. I assumed we were packing for a grim reality. A trip to the downtown courthouse, a quick signature in front of a tired county clerk, and a weekend spent eating takeout on our secondhand sofa. I walked into the bedroom and pulled my garment bag from the closet hanger. My wedding dress was not couture. It was a sample sale find, altered by a local seamstress. I zipped it up, feeling the cheap plastic zipper catch on the fabric. I carried it out to the living room, ready to load it into the trunk of my sedan. I grabbed my purse and reached for my car keys on the counter. Julian gently intercepted my hand, taking the metal ring from my fingers. "We will not need those," he said. We walked downstairs to the street level. The afternoon sun beat down on the cracked pavement of our neighborhood, radiating waves of heat. I looked toward my parked car, but Julian guided me in the opposite direction. Idling next to the curb was an immaculate black Lincoln Town Car. The paint gleamed like wet ink. Its tinted windows offered no view of the interior. A man in a tailored dark suit stood by the rear passenger door. As we approached, the man stepped forward, maintaining perfect posture. He did not ask for a rideshare confirmation. He simply reached out, took the canvas duffel from Julian, and opened the heavy door. "Good afternoon, sir," the driver said. "The cabin is set to your preferred temperature." Julian nodded. "Thank you, Marcus." I stood frozen on the sidewalk. My brain, the supply chain manager that processes data and calculates outcomes, stalled. I looked at Julian. He was still wearing the faded blue flannel shirt. His boots were scuffed from weekend yard work. But the way he stood next to the luxury vehicle, the way the driver deferred to him, signaled a reality I did not recognize. "Get in, Liv," Julian said, offering his hand. I slid onto the pristine leather seats. The doors closed, sealing us in silent, air-conditioned isolation. The engine hummed to life, a sound so smooth it was barely perceptible. The partition between us and the driver glided up. We pulled away from the curb, leaving my dusty sedan behind. I turned to the man I had dated for 3 years. "Who is Marcus?" I asked. Julian sighed, running a hand through his hair. He looked out the window as the city streets began to blur past us. "Marcus works for my family," he said. "My mother called him an administrative assistant. I thought he logged data entries and managed calendars for a mid-size firm." Julian turned back to me, his expression serious. "I do work in administration, Liv, but I am not just an assistant. I have been rotating through every ground floor department of the company for the last 3 years. Supply room, logistics, payroll, customer service. I needed to learn the business from the bottom up. If I walked straight into an executive suite, the board of directors would scream nepotism. I needed to prove I could do the grunt work and understand the supply chains before I took over the empire." The word empire hung in the cool air of the cabin. The car merged onto the interstate, heading south toward the coast. The concrete sprawl of the city gave way to towering Alabama pines and eventually the sweeping views of the Gulf Highway. The water glittered under the late afternoon sun. My reality was shifting at highway speeds. A ruined, modest wedding was dissolving into an escalating mystery. We passed a sign for a private coastal enclave, a zip code known for gated compounds and private security details. My parents thought I was marrying a man who could barely afford rent. My father thought he was the ultimate corporate success story in our family. Then Julian reached into his pocket. His phone was vibrating. He pulled it out and rested it on the center console. The screen lit up, displaying the caller ID. I stared at the bright white letters. It was a name I had heard 100 times around my parents' dining table. It was the name my father spoke with terrified reverence every time he practiced his quarterly pitch in the bathroom mirror. The name of the billionaire CEO who owned Vanguard Logistics. The screen on the center console glowed with the name Harrison Caldwell. Julian picked up the phone and pressed the answer button. He spoke in a quiet, measured tone, stating we were less than 10 minutes away. He ended the call and slipped the device back into his pocket. I sat rigid against the leather seat. My father had spent my entire life chasing the approval of Harrison Caldwell. Richard practiced his posture in the hallway mirror before annual reviews. He memorized the Vanguard Logistics quarterly earnings reports as if they were religious texts. Now the man who controlled my family's financial destiny was calling my fiancé to check his estimated time of arrival. The Lincoln Town Car turned off the main highway and onto a private coastal road lined with ancient live oaks dripping in Spanish moss. The Gulf breeze pushed against the tinted windows. We approached a set of towering wrought iron gates set into high limestone walls. The gates parted silently, recognizing the approaching vehicle. The tires crunched over a winding driveway made of crushed white shells. Through the manicured foliage, the estate revealed itself. It was a sprawling, multi-level structure of stone and glass, sitting on a private peninsula overlooking the water. My supply chain brain instinctively tried to calculate the property value. The private deepwater dock, the acreage, the architectural precision. The number easily bypassed $50 million. The car glided to a halt near the grand entrance. The driver opened the door. I stepped out into the humid Alabama air. A small detail of staff members waited by the stone steps. They did not look surprised. They smiled warmly. "Welcome back," Julian said, an older woman in a crisp uniform. She turned to me. "Welcome home, Olivia." I looked at Julian. He offered a reassuring nod and placed his hand on the small of my back, guiding me through the heavy wooden front doors. The interior was a study in quiet wealth. Vaulted ceilings showcased exposed timber. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the endless blue of the Gulf. There was no flashy branding, no loud displays of status. It was the exact opposite of the rented luxury my brother Tyler craved. We walked through the main hall and stepped out onto a vast stone terrace. A man stood near the balustrade holding a crystal glass of iced tea. He wore tailored slacks and a simple linen shirt. He turned as we approached. Harrison Caldwell did not look like the terrifying corporate dictator my father described. He had a strong jawline, graying hair, and eyes that missed nothing. He built Vanguard Logistics from a single warehouse in Mobile into a global shipping empire. He held the fate of thousands of employees in his hands. Harrison set his glass on a teak table. He bypassed Julian entirely and walked straight toward me. He did not offer a polite handshake. He wrapped his arms around me in a warm, steady embrace. "It is about time you got here," he said, stepping back to look at me. "I have waited a long time to welcome the daughter I always wanted." The contrast hit me like a physical blow. Less than 2 hours ago, my own mother stood in her kitchen and watched my financial security vanish without a hint of remorse. Now, the most powerful man in the state was looking at me with genuine paternal pride. He gestured for us to sit at the outdoor table. A staff member brought fresh glasses of tea and discreetly vanished. Julian leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. He wasted no time. He delivered the facts with the same clinical precision I used when reporting supply line failures. He explained the empty joint account. He detailed how Helen and Richard took the $20,000. He stated that the money was currently sitting at a luxury car dealership, securing a new vehicle for Tyler. Harrison listened in silence. His expression remained neutral, but the air around him seemed to chill. Then Julian delivered the final piece of data. Helen told Olivia to order pizzas for the wedding, Julian said. She told Olivia she was marrying a nobody anyway. Harrison reached for his glass. He lifted it and took a slow sip. When he set the glass back down, the sound of the crystal hitting the wood felt like a gavel striking a block. The warm, welcoming father was gone. The genial demeanor evaporated in the Gulf breeze. Sitting across from me was the corporate titan who dismantled rival companies before breakfast. "We are not going to yell at them," Harrison said, his voice dropping an octave. "Anger is a useless emotion. It warns your enemy that a strike is coming. We are going to let their greed blind them until they walk straight into a trap." He tapped a sequence on his smartwatch. Within 60 seconds, an executive assistant stepped onto the terrace holding a digital tablet. Harrison did not look up as he issued orders. "Call the events team. I want the estate grounds prepped for a wedding this Saturday. Mobilize the elite catering staff, the floral designers, and the string quartet. Pull my private guest list. I want the entire Vanguard Logistics Board of Directors in attendance, along with the key regional executives." The assistant nodded, rapidly typing on the screen. "It will be done, sir." Harrison looked at me. His eyes were sharp, calculating, and entirely focused on my victory. "We are going to orchestrate the most exclusive high society gala this coast has seen in a decade," he explained. "But your family will not know a thing about it. You will maintain the illusion. You will tell them you are having a cheap, ruined wedding in a public park. Let them complain about the grass. Let them mock the budget. Let them believe they broke you. When they arrive for the ceremony, they will realize exactly who they stole from." The tactical brilliance of the plan settled over me. It was not just a wedding anymore. It was an extraction. I was going to sever the toxic roots of my past while standing in front of the very people my father worshipped. I nodded slowly. "I can play the part. I have practiced letting them think they are in control." Harrison smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "Good, because there is another variable we need to address." He folded his hands on the table. He tilted his head, studying me closely. "Olivia, your father works in the regional finance division. You have a background in supply chain management and forensic accounting. Think carefully before you answer this. Has Richard mentioned any sudden audits or internal reviews in his department over the last 2 weeks? My pulse skipped a beat. I thought back to the dinners over the past month. My father coming home late, the nervous tapping of his foot under the table, the sudden complaints about corporate oversight making his life difficult. Yes, I answered. 3 nights ago, he complained that the auditing team was demanding receipts for his vendor contracts. He said it was just a routine compliance check. It is not routine, Harrison said softly. I ordered that audit personally. I frowned, trying to connect the data points. Why? Harrison leaned closer. $20,000 is a very specific amount of money to vanish in a single morning. You said the joint account was held at the same bank Vanguard uses for regional payroll. Tell me, Olivia, did your parents actually have the cash to match your savings, or have they been living beyond their means? The floor seemed to drop out from beneath the teak table. Tyler had debt. My parents leased cars they could barely afford. They took vacations on credit. They never had $10,000 in liquid cash to match my contributions. They live paycheck to paycheck, I whispered, the realization turning my blood to ice. Harrison nodded slowly. I suspect Richard did not just drain your savings account today. I suspect he moved corporate numbers around to cover his tracks. We are looking at a fake vendor contract designed to siphon Vanguard funds. He did not just steal a wedding from his daughter. He embezzled from my company. The conflict morphed, mutating into something far more dangerous than a ruined family dynamic. My father was not just a selfish parent favoring his golden son. He was a corporate thief stepping onto a landmine crafted by his own boss. And Harrison Caldwell was about to hand me the detonator. 4 days remained until the ceremony. I returned to my apartment and resumed my daily routine as if the fundamental rules of my life had not just been rewritten. I logged into my remote workstation for the supply chain firm, checking freight logs and approving regional shipments. I needed to maintain the illusion of a defeated daughter. The facade required a high level of patience. My phone rang on Tuesday afternoon, right in the middle of a complex logistics routing. The screen displayed the name of my younger brother. I accepted the call, pressing the phone to my ear while keeping my eyes fixed on the data filling my monitor. Tyler did not say hello. He launched straight into a complaint about the rising cost of premium gasoline. Then came the actual demand. He wanted me to cover the first 6 months of auto insurance for his new luxury SUV. He claimed the vehicle was draining his lifestyle budget. He explained he needed to purchase custom-tailored suits for his new medical sales job, and the high insurance premiums were slowing his momentum. "You were just doing a cheap park wedding anyway," he said, his voice dripping with casual arrogance. "You do not have any big expenses left. It is the least you can do, since you are not helping with the monthly car payments." The silence on my end stretched. I listened to him breathe, waiting for any hint of self-awareness. There was none. I did not argue or raise my voice. I told him I would review my budget and ended the call. I immediately opened a secure digital folder on my desktop and logged the exact time and nature of his demand. 30 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a series of text messages from my mother. Helen was entirely oblivious to the irony of demanding VIP treatment at an event she had personally defunded. She sent a detailed list of dietary restrictions for the fake public park reception. She required gluten-free pastry options, a specific brand of imported sparkling water, and a shaded seating area near a fan because the July humidity in Alabama would ruin her hair. She ended the text thread by reminding me to keep things classy, even if Julian could only afford a picnic. I took screenshots of every single message. I downloaded the audio files of every previous voicemail. I pulled my bank statements, tracing the exact timestamp the joint account was drained. I approached my family the way I approached a corrupt vendor in a compromised supply chain network. I built a forensic timeline of their entitlement. Every text message became a data point. Every arrogant demand became a piece of evidence. I was not just planning a wedding anymore. I was preparing a corporate dossier. Harrison Caldwell needed them blind, and my silence was the perfect blindfold. The true depth of the trap revealed itself on Wednesday evening. To keep up appearances, Julian and I agreed to meet my parents for dinner at a local steakhouse near their suburban neighborhood. We arrived early and sat in a dark leather booth. Julian wore his standard flannel shirt, playing his part as the unimpressive mid-level worker to perfection. When my parents arrived, my father Richard did not possess his usual corporate swagger. The man who typically dominated the dining table with loud tales of golf games and executive board meetings looked hollow. His skin held a pale gray tone. Dark circles rimmed his eyes. He sat down heavily, signaling the waiter for a double scotch before even glancing at the menu. Helen complained about the dim lighting, but Richard ignored her. He loosened his silk tie, his fingers trembling slightly against his collar. He looked across the table at me and then at Julian, dismissing my fiancé with a brief, arrogant glance. "The Home Office launched an internal audit this week," Richard muttered, staring down at the polished wood of the table. "They sent a team of forensic accountants from the corporate headquarters. They are ripping through the regional finance division like a hurricane." I picked up my water glass, taking a slow, measured sip. "An audit," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "Is that unusual for this time of year?" Richard wiped a heavy bead of sweat from his forehead. "Not a standard compliance check. They are digging into vendor contracts from the last quarter. Every single invoice. Every line item. It is a witch hunt. Harrison Caldwell ordered it personally. The man is a tyrant. He sits in his coastal mansion and decides to make our lives miserable just to prove he holds the leash." Julian sat quietly beside me, cutting his steak with deliberate precision. He chewed his food, his expression unreadable, while the man across the table openly insulted his father. Julian did not defend the CEO. He just listened, absorbing the data. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. I needed to extract the truth without raising suspicion. I played the role of the concerned, loyal daughter. "You always run a tight department," I said, offering a reassuring tone. "You have nothing to worry about, right? Your division is clean." Richard swallowed hard. His eyes darted toward Helen, who was busy inspecting her silverware, looking for water spots. He leaned in closer, dropping his voice to a hoarse whisper. "I had to expedite some things for your brother. The car dealership needed an immediate wire transfer to release the vehicle on Monday. The joint account did not have enough liquid cash to cover the luxury trim package Tyler insisted on getting." I kept my face still, suppressing the shock radiating through my chest. "How did you cover the difference?" I asked. Richard took a long, desperate swallow of his scotch. "I moved some company numbers around. I drafted a temporary vendor contract to float the difference. It was supposed to be a short-term loan. I was going to balance the ledger next month after my quarterly bonus cleared. It is standard creative accounting. But these auditors are moving too fast. If they cross-reference the dummy vendor account with the dealership wire transfer..." He let the sentence hang in the air, the crushing reality of his situation finally catching up to his ego. He had just confessed to corporate embezzlement. He admitted to stealing from Vanguard Logistics to buy a car for a son who refused to work for his own lifestyle. He risked a lucrative career, a pension, and his freedom to ensure his golden child could drive a status symbol. I offered no comfort. I did not reach across the table to hold his hand or tell him everything would be fine. I simply nodded, acting as if I did not grasp the legal gravity of his words. "I am sure you will figure it out," I said softly. "You always do." My family sat across from me, chewing their expensive steaks, secure in their belief that they were the central figures of the universe. They thought they were stepping on me. They thought my financial future was a sacrifice they were entitled to make. They had no idea they were standing directly on a corporate landmine. And Harrison Caldwell was quietly preparing to detonate it. The dinner ended with Richard paying the bill using a credit card that was likely approaching its limit. His hands shook as he signed the receipt. We walked out into the warm, thick Alabama night. Tomorrow was the rehearsal dinner. It would be the final illusion before the trap sprang shut permanently. Friday evening arrived with a heavy downpour, washing the Alabama streets. I chose a rundown diner off the interstate for our rehearsal dinner. The exterior sign flickered a dull pink, casting long shadows over the wet pavement. The interior smelled of stale fryer oil, bleach, and burnt coffee. It was the perfect stage for my family to showcase their true nature. Julian and I arrived early, taking a corner booth with cracked red vinyl seats. He wore a plain gray sweater. I wore a simple cotton dress. We looked exactly like the broke, defeated couple my parents expected to see. I watched the rain slide down the glass window, plotting the logistics of the next 24 hours in my head. The bell above the glass door chimed. Helen, Richard, and Tyler walked in. They brought the storm inside with them, shaking designer umbrellas and complaining loudly about the parking lot puddles. Tyler wore a silk shirt covered in luxury logos, broadcasting a level of wealth he did not earn. Helen carried a handbag worth 2 mortgage payments. Richard wore a custom-tailored suit that looked entirely out of place in a room full of laminated menus. They stood out against the backdrop of tired truck drivers and weary waitresses, like actors reading lines for the wrong play. They slid into the opposite side of the sticky booth, scowling at the table settings. As they settled in, Julian reached into his pocket. He placed his phone face down near the center table condiment caddy. He tapped the screen once before flipping it over. A tiny green light indicated the microphone was active. 50 miles away in a high-tech home office at the coastal estate, Harrison Caldwell was listening to a live audio feed. The Billionaire CEO was tuning in to hear exactly how his regional finance director spoke behind closed doors. Richard ordered a heavy steak dinner, despite the cheap setting. The audit panic from Wednesday night seemed buried under a fresh layer of forced bravado. He leaned back, stretching his arms across the vinyl booth. He announced he was in line for a massive promotion. A vice president title, he claimed, would be finalized by the end of the fiscal quarter. He laughed, a harsh sound that echoed over the diner music. He claimed the internal audit was just a minor hurdle, an inconvenience designed by out-of-touch executives. He told us he had Harrison Caldwell wrapped around his finger. He called the CEO an aging dinosaur who relied on regional directors to do the heavy lifting while taking all the credit. Richard bragged about manipulating expense reports for years, stating that Vanguard Logistics owed him for his brilliance. He told Julian that the corporate world was about taking what you deserved, not waiting for handouts. Every word was transmitted directly to the man holding his corporate leash. Julian did not react. He just nodded, sipping his black coffee, allowing Richard to dig a grave with his own arrogance. Tyler grew bored with the corporate talk. He ordered a massive plate of ribs and wiped his hands on the thin paper napkins. His eyes caught the metallic glint on the wrist of Julian. Tyler reached across the table, pointing a greasy finger. He mocked the timepiece. He asked Julian if he got it out of a cereal box because it lacked diamonds or a flashy rotating bezel. Tyler boasted about the gold-plated piece he planned to buy with his first medical sales commission. He told Julian to take the watch off so he could see how cheap it felt in his hands. Julian unclasped the leather band and handed it over without a single word of protest. Tyler turned it over, sneering at the minimalist dial and the lack of branding. He had no idea he was holding a vintage Patek Philippe, a watch handed down through 3 generations of the Caldwell family, a piece of horology worth more than the luxury SUV parked outside. Tyler tossed it back across the laminate table, sliding it carelessly near a pool of spilled ketchup. Julian caught the watch. He wiped the leather clean with a steady hand and strapped it back onto his wrist. The stoicism was terrifying. Julian watched Tyler the way a scientist observes a doomed subject in a controlled experiment. There was no anger in his eyes, just cold, clinical observation. My brother thought he was dominating the interaction. He failed to realize he was merely providing data to a man who possessed the power to ruin him. My mind processed the evening like a shipping manifest. Richard boasting was a liability. Tyler displaying arrogance was a defective product. Helen, sitting in silence while her son mocked my fiancé, was a breached contract. The entire family unit was a compromised supply line that needed to be severed. The waitress dropped the green paper check onto the table. The total was under $80, a tiny fraction of what a traditional rehearsal dinner would cost. The slip of paper sat there for a long minute. Richard looked out the window, suddenly fascinated by the rain falling in the parking lot. Tyler checked his phone, pretending to be busy with an urgent message from a fictional client. The men who spent the last hour bragging about their wealth and corporate dominance suddenly went silent over an $80 diner tab. Helen picked up her designer handbag. She pulled out a compact mirror to check her lipstick. She looked at the bill and then looked at me. She stated she only had a vanilla milkshake and a side salad. She pushed the check across the table toward my side. "You should be used to budgeting by now," she said, her voice loud enough for the neighboring booths to hear. "Since you do not have to pay for a fancy reception tomorrow, you can cover this. Consider it our wedding gift to you." The sheer cruelty of the statement hung in the humid air of the diner. My own mother stole $20,000 from my savings account, funneled it to my brother, and called an $80 diner tab a wedding gift. A year ago, I would have felt the familiar sting of rejection. I would have internalized the insult. I would have quietly paid the bill and cried in my 10-year-old sedan all the way home, wondering why I was never enough for them. Tonight, I just smiled. The supply chain manager in me recognized the final data point had been collected. The audit was complete. I pulled my credit card from my wallet and placed it on the plastic tray. "It is taken care of," I said, keeping my tone bright and light. I thanked them for coming out in the storm. I told them I could not wait to see them at the park tomorrow for the ceremony. We stood up and walked out into the rain, leaving them sitting in the booth. Julian held the diner door open for me. The night air was cool against my skin. The final insult had been delivered and logged into evidence. The live audio feed was terminated. Harrison Caldwell had heard everything he needed to hear. The trap was set and the bait was taken. Tomorrow, the gravity of their actions would pull them under, and they would never possess the power to look down on me again. Saturday morning broke with a pale golden light filtering through the sheer curtains of the Caldwell Estate master suite. I woke up enveloped in silk, listening to the distant rhythm of the Gulf waves hitting the seawall. There was no panic. There was no rushing to secure a cheap floral arrangement or calling vendors to confirm arrival times. The logistics were handled. I sat up and drank coffee poured from a silver carafe. A team of 4 elite stylists moved around the suite, setting up their stations with quiet efficiency. They spoke in hushed, respectful tones, treating me not like a burden, but like an executive preparing for a major address. The contrast between my current reality and the reality I orchestrated for my family was sharp. 20 miles north, the humidity in the city had already reached a suffocating peak. The heavy rain from the night before left Centennial Park a swamp of thick brown mud and standing water. At 9 in the morning, my phone screen lit up with the first text message. It was from Helen. She complained that the public parking lot was full and she had to walk 3 blocks in her designer heels. 10 minutes later, a message from Tyler arrived. He sent a photo of his Italian leather loafers sinking into the wet grass, accompanied by a string of angry emojis. Richard called twice, but I let the phone ring out, sending him to an automated voicemail greeting. I sat in a velvet chair while a stylist began pinning my hair. I watched my phone screen act as a live data feed of their discomfort. My family stood under the brutal Alabama sun, swatting at mosquitoes, searching for a wedding setup that did not exist. I kept them waiting for 45 minutes. I wanted the heat to ruin Helen and her perfect blowout. I wanted the mud to stain Tyler and his expensive trousers. I wanted Richard to feel the frustration of a schedule he could not dictate. For 28 years, I had rushed to fix their inconveniences. Today, I let them sit in the mess they helped create. At exactly 9:45, I sent a single text to the family group chat. A luxury corporate transport has been dispatched to your location due to a last-minute change of venue. Please board the vehicle. I switched applications on my tablet, pulling up a GPS tracking program. A blinking blue dot representing a high-end executive sprinter van appeared on the map. It navigated the city grid and idled near the park entrance. The driver was a Vanguard Logistics security professional. I knew the exact script he would use. He would approach them, verify their names, and open the sliding door to the pristine air-conditioned cabin. He would offer no explanations. He would simply state that he was hired to transport the bridal family. My phone buzzed again. Tyler sent a text boasting that Julian finally managed to do something right by securing a decent ride. Helen texted that she hoped the new venue had proper catering because she was starving. They climbed into the back of that van entirely stripped of their autonomy. They surrendered their navigation to a driver they did not know, heading to a destination they could not predict. They were boxed in moving down the highway like blind freight. The heavy oak door to the bridal suite clicked open. Harrison Caldwell stepped into the room. He wore a flawless black tuxedo, his silver hair perfectly styled. He carried a flat velvet box in his hands. The stylists immediately stepped back, offering him the floor out of ingrained corporate respect. He waved them off with a gentle smile and walked over to where I sat. He placed the velvet box on the vanity table. I opened the latch. Resting on the dark fabric was a diamond necklace. The stones caught the morning light, throwing fractured prisms across the ceiling. It was not a flashy modern piece. It possessed the quiet, heavy gravity of an antique heirloom. That belonged to Julian, and his late mother, Harrison said, his voice steady and calm. It has been in the Caldwell family for 4 generations. She always wanted a daughter to wear it on her wedding day. Today, it belongs to you. I looked at the diamonds and then up at the billionaire CEO. My own father stole my savings to buy a car for my brother. The man standing beside me was handing over a piece of his family history without a second thought. My throat tightened, but I maintained my composure. I lifted the necklace, and Harrison fastened the platinum clasp behind my neck. The metal felt cool against my skin. "You look like a Caldwell," he stated, stepping back to evaluate the presentation. "Thank you," I said, touching the center stone. "But I do not know if I am ready for the fallout. My father is going to recognize every executive in your crowd." Harrison rested his hands on the back of my chair, looking at our reflection in the mirror. "Today is not just a wedding, Olivia. This is an extraction. You have spent your life attached to a toxic lineage that feeds on your stability. We are pulling you out of that system. We are grafting you onto a foundation built on mutual respect and actual loyalty. Let Richard recognize the executives. Let him see the Vanguard Logistics Board of Directors sitting in the front rows. The shock will paralyze him long enough for the reality to sink in." He checked his watch and nodded. "I will see you at the top of the stairs." Harrison exited the room, leaving me alone with the stylists and my glowing tablet. I tracked the blinking blue dot as it moved down the interstate. The van was making good time. The logistics were flawless. I pictured my family sitting in the plush leather seats of the transport. Richard was likely bragging to Helen that his corporate status at Vanguard somehow manifested this luxury upgrade. He probably convinced himself that he willed the Sprinter van into existence through sheer executive aura. They were blind to the trap closing around them. The stylist finished my hair and helped me step into my gown. The dress fit perfectly, a structured silhouette that felt more like armor than silk. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror, adjusting the heirloom diamonds. I did not look like the scapegoat sister anymore. I did not look like the daughter who settled for pizzas in a public park. I looked like a woman preparing to inherit an empire. I glanced down at the tracking tablet one final time. The blinking dot left the public highway. It turned onto the private coastal road lined with Spanish moss. The van was less than 2 miles away. The speed indicator dropped as the vehicle approached the towering limestone walls of the Caldwell estate. I knew the driver was pressing the remote to open the massive wrought iron gates. The tires were crunching over the crushed white shells of the private driveway. My family was trapped inside the cabin expecting a minor upgrade to a local banquet hall. They had no idea they were driving onto a $50 million property owned by the man Richard had just admitted to defrauding. The doors of the transport were about to slide open, and the illusions they spent decades building were going to violently shatter on the immaculate stone pavement. From my vantage point on the second-floor balcony, I watched the black Sprinter van glide to a halt on the circular driveway. The heavy sliding doors hissed open. My family stepped out of the air-conditioned cabin into the bright coastal sunshine. The sound of a live string quartet drifted across the manicured lawns, blending with the distant sound of the Gulf waves hitting the seawall. Valets in crisp gray uniforms stepped forward to close the transport doors. Helen stepped onto the crushed white shells. She stopped adjusting her sunglasses as she took in the towering limestone walls and the massive floral arches constructed from white orchids and imported roses. Her mind processed the luxury through the lens of her own financial habits. Helen lived her life leveraging high-interest credit cards to maintain a facade of neighborhood wealth. She lacked the capacity to understand generational assets. She immediately assumed I had done the same thing. She turned to Richard, whispering loudly that I must have taken out a massive secret loan. She called me irresponsible. She muttered that taking on deep debt for a single afternoon was exactly why I would always struggle with money. She felt validated in her decision to drain my savings account, believing I would have wasted the funds anyway. She patted her designer handbag, secure in her delusion. Helen attempted to recover her footing and assert her perceived status. She spotted a group of women wearing understated tailored dresses standing near the fountain. Helen tried to approach them, offering a loud compliment about the catering staff. The women turned, looking at Helen and her flashy logo-covered accessories with polite confusion. They offered tight, brief smiles before turning back to their private conversation. Helen experienced the sharp sting of social rejection. She spent her life trying to project elite status in suburban Alabama neighborhoods, but standing on the Caldwell estate, she was exposed as an imposter. True wealth whispered, while Helen was used to screaming. She retreated back to her husband, feeling out of place and deeply unsettled. Tyler adjusted his silk shirt. He did not care how the event was funded, as long as he could exploit the amenities. He possessed a toxic entitlement, viewing every situation as an opportunity to elevate his own comfort. He spotted the open bar situated near the terrace. Professional bartenders were pouring top-shelf bourbon and vintage champagne into crystal flutes. Tyler smirked and walked toward the premium liquor, expecting to be treated like the guest of honor. He leaned against the polished mahogany bar and ordered a double pour of a rare reserve scotch. A man in a dark-tailored suit stepped seamlessly between Tyler and the bartender. The private security professional did not raise his voice or make a sudden movement. He held a digital tablet and politely asked for a name. Tyler scoffed, puffing out his chest and giving his full name, expecting immediate VIP access. The security agent scrolled through the screen. He calmly informed Tyler that his profile was coded for standard seating only, and bar privileges were reserved for the Caldwell family network until after the ceremony concluded. Tyler tried to argue, his face flushing red. The guard merely shifted his stance, projecting a quiet physical authority that forced my brother to step back. Denied his status symbol, Tyler retreated to the edge of the lawn, holding a basic cup of ice water. Richard did not notice his son being humiliated. Richard was frozen on the walkway. He was a man who defined his entire existence by corporate hierarchy. He spent 20 years memorizing the faces of the Vanguard Logistics executive board, studying their profiles in annual reports, and watching them from the back of crowded conference rooms. He worshipped their power and craved their approval. Now those same faces were mingling on the lawn, holding champagne and discussing global shipping routes. He saw the chief operations officer laughing with a state senator. He spotted the head of global acquisitions standing near a stone pillar, checking a silver pocket watch. These were not the friends of a mid-level administrative assistant. These were the industry titans he had spent his adult life serving. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly pale shade. His mind scrambled to make sense of the data. He wondered if Vanguard Logistics was hosting a corporate retreat on the same day as my wedding. He wondered if the venue had double-booked the property. A waiter passed by holding a silver tray of caviar appetizers. Richard reached out, grabbing the sleeve of the young man. Richard had lost his usual arrogant posture. His breathing was shallow and erratic. He demanded to know what venue they were at. He asked why the Vanguard board of directors was gathered on the lawn. The waiter paused, balancing the tray with trained grace. He smiled politely and corrected my father. He stated that this was not a corporate venue or a rented banquet space. He informed Richard that he was standing on the private residence of Mr. Harrison Caldwell. The name hit Richard like a physical blow to the chest. His hand dropped from the waiter. He stumbled backward slightly, his expensive leather shoes slipping on the driveway. His brain rapidly connected the missing data points. Julian was not a nobody. Julian was a Caldwell. He was the heir to the Vanguard shipping empire. The man who wore faded flannel shirts and drank cheap diner coffee was the son of the billionaire who signed his paychecks. The physical symptoms of sheer terror manifested in Richard. His chest tightened and his palms began to sweat. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, dabbing at his forehead. He looked at the vast estate, the private deep-water dock holding a massive yacht, and the sheer scale of the power surrounding him. He remembered every snide remark he had made about Julian. He remembered calling him a nobody. He remembered instructing me to order pizzas for the son of a billionaire. He realized Julian had sat in their living room for 3 years, absorbing their insults while holding the power to destroy them with a single phone call. The stoicism Julian displayed at the diner suddenly made terrifying sense. It was not the silence of a weak man. It was the patience of an apex predator, watching its prey wander into a cage. Richard realized he did not just steal $20,000 from his daughter. He embezzled Vanguard corporate funds to buy a car for a parasite, and he did it right in front of the man who owned the company. The money he siphoned using a fake vendor contract was a direct theft from the family I was about to marry into. The audit from the Home Office was no longer a mystery. It was a targeted missile heading straight for his career, his pension, and his freedom. He had sat in a diner the night before and bragged about manipulating expense reports directly into a live microphone controlled by his boss. An event coordinator holding a leather clipboard approached my paralyzed family. She did not offer them the warm greeting reserved for the bridal party. She treated them like low-level attendees. She guided them away from the mingling executives and directed them toward the seating area arranged on the lower lawn. The mahogany chairs were arranged in perfect, symmetrical lines, facing a flower-covered altar overlooking the water. The coordinator walked my parents and my brother past the front rows reserved for the Caldwell family. She walked them past the second and third sections, filled with corporate officers and state politicians. She led them all the way to the very back row of the venue. She handed them simple printed programs and walked away, leaving them isolated in the rear. They sat down in silence, surrounded by the wealth they worshipped, but forbidden from touching it. The string quartet transitioned from light classical music to the structured, heavy notes of the bridal march. The guests found their seats, and a hush fell over the sprawling lawn. I stood at the top of the grand stone staircase, looking down at the 400 people gathered below. The ocean breeze caught the edge of my silk veil. The trap had been successfully sprung. The reality check had broken their delusions. Now it was time for the public severance. It was time to walk down the aisle and leave them behind forever. The string quartet finished a delicate classical piece and paused. A brief, heavy silence settled over the sprawling coastal lawn. Then the musicians transitioned into the steady, structured rhythm of the bridal march. At the top of the grand stone staircase, the heavy oak doors of the estate pulled open. I stepped out onto the landing, and the coastal sunlight caught the Caldwell heirloom diamonds resting against my collarbone. 400 guests rose to their feet in unison. The sound of shifting chairs and rustling fabric rippled across the manicured grass. I looked down at the sea of faces. The front rows were filled with the Vanguard Logistics Board of Directors, regional vice presidents, and state politicians. They were people who calculated risk for a living. They understood power dynamics, corporate acquisitions, and the brutal math of high society. They turned to watch my descent. In the very back row, my father Richard realized he was facing a crisis of optics. He was a regional finance director who had spent 20 years clawing his way up the middle management ladder. He defined his worth by his proximity to power. Sitting in the final row while his own boss hosted his daughter was a visual demotion he could not accept. His corporate survival instincts kicked in. He needed to assert his position. He needed to prove to the executives that he was the patriarch, the vital bridge connecting a mid-level Vanguard employee to the Caldwell dynasty. Richard stepped out of the back row, ignoring the urgent whisper of the event coordinator trying to keep him seated. He marched up the side aisle toward the base of the grand staircase. He adjusted his silk tie and pasted a confident, practiced smile on his face. He intended to intercept me at the landing, link his arm through mine, and walk me past the chief operations officer and the global acquisitions team. He wanted to parade his perceived success in front of the people he worshipped. He reached the bottom of the limestone steps just as I began my descent. Richard held out his right arm, his posture projecting a false authority. He opened his mouth, prepared to deliver a performative greeting for the benefit of the watching crowd. He never spoke the words. From the shadowed alcove near the terrace doors, Harrison Caldwell emerged. The Billionaire CEO did not rush. He moved with the silent, lethal authority of a man who commanded global fleets. He stepped smoothly onto the stone landing, placing his body directly between my father and me. Harrison formed a solid physical barrier, an unyielding wall of tailored black tuxedo and executive dominance. Richard froze. His outstretched arm hung awkwardly in the humid air. The practiced smile shattered, leaving a hollow, panicked expression in its place. He looked at the man who signed his paychecks, the man who owned the estate, and the man who had just initiated a forensic audit on his department. Harrison did not raise his voice. He did not need to make a scene to assert control. He looked Richard directly in the eyes. The gaze was cold, surgical, and entirely devoid of pity. "She is walking with the family that actually values her," Harrison said. The words were spoken softly, but they carried the weight of a judge delivering a final verdict. Richard lowered his arm, his shoulders slumped forward. The regional director who bragged in a diner about manipulating his CEO was suddenly reduced to a trembling, trespassing guest on his boss's driveway. Harrison turned his back to my father, dismissing him entirely. The CEO offered me his arm. I slid my hand through the crook of his elbow, feeling the steady support of a man who built an empire on loyalty. We began our walk down the long white runner. We left Richard stranded at the base of the stairs. He could not march forward to join us, and returning to the back row meant admitting defeat in front of 400 people. He stood, marooned on the edge of the grass, a highly visible monument to his own failure. As Harrison and I walked down the center aisle, the Whisper Network activated. The Vanguard executives were highly observant. They missed nothing. They watched their founder and CEO personally escort the bride while leaving his own regional finance director adrift. They witnessed the public transfer of power. In the corporate world, optics dictate reality. The board members saw Harrison claim me as his own while physically blocking my blood relative. It was not just a break in wedding tradition, it was a corporate execution broadcast in real time. I saw the chief operations officer lean over and whisper to a senior vice president. I saw a regional manager from the Atlanta office shake his head, staring at Richard with a mixture of shock and secondhand embarrassment. They recognized that my father had crossed a fatal line. Harrison Caldwell did not discard employees publicly unless they were already marked for termination. The executives mentally crossed Richard off their networking lists. In the span of a 2-minute walk, my father lost his reputation, his social leverage, and his future at the company. I kept my chin raised and my eyes focused straight ahead. I did not look back at the man who stole my savings to buy a car for a brother who sat uselessly in the back row. I focused on the altar overlooking the Gulf. Julian stood waiting under the arch of white orchids. He wore a classic dark suit, his posture relaxed but commanding. He was no longer playing the role of the mid-level administrative assistant in a faded flannel shirt. He looked every bit the heir to the Caldwell legacy. When we reached the end of the aisle, Harrison stopped. He turned to me and offered a brief, warm smile. He did not hand me away like property. He simply stepped aside, allowing me to step forward on my own terms. I took Julian by the hand. His fingers were still rough and calloused from learning the ground floor logistics of his family business, but his grip was steady. The officiant began the ceremony speaking about partnerships built on trust and foundations forged in truth. The words resonated with a sharp clarity. I had spent my entire life trying to buy the love of a family that viewed me as an ATM. I had paid their debts, managed their crises, and accepted their insults. Now I was standing on a $50 million estate, surrounded by people who recognized my worth without demanding a wire transfer. We exchanged our vows, reciting the promises with quiet conviction. Julian slid a platinum band onto my finger. I placed a matching ring on his hand. The string quartet began to play a bright, triumphant chord, signaling the end of the ceremony. The crowd erupted into polite applause. Julian and I turned to face the audience as husband and wife. I scanned the sea of clapping guests. My eyes drifted past the smiling Vanguard executives and the clapping politicians. I looked all the way to the back row near the edge of the manicured lawn. Helen sat rigidly, clutching her designer handbag, her face pale, as she watched her suburban royalty fantasy disintegrate. Tyler stared at his phone, ignoring the ceremony entirely, likely trying to figure out why his status symbols were failing him. And standing near the rear aisle was Richard. He was no longer trying to look confident. He was sweating heavily, typing frantically on his cell phone. The ceremony was over, but the trap had only just begun to close. We walked back up the aisle together, heading toward the sprawling stone terrace where the champagne tower waited. The reception was the final phase. Richard thought the public humiliation was the worst thing that could happen to him today. He had no idea that Harrison Caldwell had a finalized audit report folded inside his tuxedo jacket, and the local authorities were already en route to the coastal gates. The reception began on the sprawling stone terrace. Servers navigated the crowd carrying silver trays of seared scallops and vintage champagne. The jazz band set a bright, energetic tempo, filling the coastal air with celebratory melodies. Julian and I moved through the attendees, accepting warm congratulations from industry leaders and local politicians. We belonged to this environment, operating as equal partners. My family did not. My brother grew restless within the first hour. The standard premium bar bored him. Tyler spent his youth believing rules applied only to other people. Our parents shielded him from consequences, creating a young man who expected exclusive treatment simply for existing. He noticed a set of mahogany double doors guarded by two men in dark suits. This was the private tasting room reserved for the Caldwell Inner Circle. Tyler approached the entrance, adjusting his designer belt. He attempted to stride past the security detail without breaking his pace. A firm hand pressed against his chest, stopping him instantly. Tyler scoffed. He demanded to know if the men recognized his identity. He bragged about his new medical sales position and referenced the luxury vehicle parked miles away. The guards exchanged a brief, amused glance. One of them informed my brother that his name was irrelevant. The professional stated that Tyler lacked the proper security clearance, and his access was permanently restricted to the public lawn. Tyler raised his voice, causing a minor scene. He demanded to speak to a manager, invoking our father and his supposed executive influence. A Vanguard vice president standing nearby chuckled, dismissing the outburst as the behavior of a spoiled child. Denied his perceived birthright, Tyler retreated. His ego suffered a massive bruise, delivered by men he considered beneath his social class. He sulped near the edge of the patio, holding a basic water glass, his designer clothes doing nothing to elevate his status. Meanwhile, my father navigated the terrace in a state of sheer panic. He had consumed 3 glasses of bourbon, trying to steady his nerves. Richard was a man running out of options. His corporate survival instincts pushed him toward a desperate gamble. He spotted the billionaire CEO standing near an elaborate champagne tower. Harrison was speaking with a state senator discussing municipal zoning laws. Richard recognized this narrow window for damage control. He waited until the politician stepped away before initiating his approach. Richard wiped his forehead with a damp cloth. He tried to project the confidence of a seasoned regional finance director, but his physical symptoms betrayed him. His voice trembled. He greeted his boss and immediately launched into a rehearsed speech. Richard called the morning events a vast misunderstanding. He claimed the $20,000 withdrawal was a simple banking error. He framed the situation as a temporary clerical issue he planned to correct by Monday morning. He offered a strained laugh, suggesting they could handle the financial discrepancy internally without involving the corporate auditing department. Harrison did not return the laugh. He took a slow, measured sip from his crystal flute. He looked at the sweating manager with the clinical detachment of a surgeon examining a terminal diagnosis. The CEO stated that the internal review was not a random compliance check. He initiated the forensic sweep the moment Julian reported the missing wedding funds. Harrison explained that Vanguard Logistics employed the finest accounting investigators in the state. They did not make errors, and they did not overlook discrepancies. The executive lowered his beverage. He detailed the exact mechanics of the fraud. Harrison explained that taking my savings was a profound moral failure, but the true hazard was the corporate cover-up. Richard had drafted a fraudulent vendor contract using a shell company name. He used that fake invoice to expense $15,000 directly from the Vanguard corporate accounts. My father used company capital to bridge the financial gap for that luxury SUV. Harrison reached inside his tailored tuxedo jacket. He withdrew a single folded sheet of heavy stock paper. He held the document out in the humid coastal air. It was the finalized executive audit report bearing the official corporate seal. The paper represented the end of a 20-year career and the beginning of a criminal nightmare. The billionaire delivered the final blow quietly, ensuring only my father could hear the devastation. You did not just steal a wedding from your daughter, Richard. You embezzled from my company to buy a car for a parasite. My mother was standing 3 feet away, holding a fresh cocktail. Helen had drifted over, hoping to salvage her social standing by associating with the host. She heard every single word of the confrontation. Her country club fantasies evaporated in an instant. The delusion of suburban royalty shattered alongside her future financial security. Her fingers went slack. The crystal vessel slipped from her grip, hitting the stone terrace. It broke, sending sharp fragments sliding across the patio. The jazz music continued to play a lively, upbeat rhythm. The cheerful melody mocked their sudden destruction. Other guests turned their heads, briefly noting the broken glass, before returning to their networking conversations. They viewed my parents as clumsy outsiders, ruining a perfect afternoon. The elite crowd offered no sympathy for their distress. Richard stared at the official audit report. His breathing grew shallow and rapid. He looked past the terrace toward the private driveway, expecting to find an exit strategy. Instead, he found the exact opposite. He saw the reflection first. Flashing red and blue lights pulsed rhythmically against the towering limestone walls of the estate gates. The authorities had arrived to collect their target, and the trap was permanently sealed. The flashing lights at the gate did not cause a panic among the attendees. In the circles of Newport wealth and corporate logistics, discretion is the highest currency. Harrison Caldwell did not allow public spectacles to ruin his catered events. He offered a subtle nod to the head of his private security detail. 3 men wearing earpieces and tailored charcoal suits detached themselves from the perimeter of the terrace. They moved with practiced fluidity, navigating the jazz band and the dancing guests without drawing attention. They approached my family, forming a tight, inescapable triangle. The lead agent placed a firm hand on the shoulder of my father. He spoke in a low register, directing Richard toward the side exit leading to the valet stand. There was no room for negotiation. Helen attempted to resist planting her heels into the stone patio. A second agent simply stepped closer, using his physical presence to force her forward. Tyler followed behind them, his face pale, stripping away his usual unearned swagger. They were being actively purged from an ecosystem they desperately wanted to inhabit. The jazz music continued to play, washing over their silent, forced exit. I excused myself from a conversation with a shipping magnate and walked through the main hall. I reached the front driveway just as the security team deposited my parents near the towering oak doors. 2 unmarked sedans sat idling near the fountain. Detectives in plain clothes stood near the vehicles, holding leather binders. The air was thick with coastal humidity and impending consequence. Alabama law enforcement dealing with white-collar crime did not operate with loud sirens or dramatic tackles. They operated with paperwork and quiet authority. Helen saw me standing on the limestone steps. Her survival instincts defaulted to the only tactic she knew. She weaponized her maternal status. She broke away from the security escort and ran toward me, her designer heels clicking frantically against the pavement. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. She reached out, trying to grab my hands, but I took a calculated step backward. Her fingers grasped empty air. She begged me to intervene. She pleaded with me to call off the CEO, claiming this was all a massive mistake that would ruin the family name. She reminded me that we were blood. She insisted that family protects family, no matter the cost. She expected the daughter, who spent years managing their crises, to step in and absorb this disaster. For 28 years, she had relied on my sense of duty to fix Tyler and his broken leases. She relied on my silent compliance to let Richard pretend he was a corporate king. She expected the supply chain manager to repair this broken system. I looked at the woman who told me to order pizzas for my own wedding. I felt no anger and no sorrow. The emotional ledger was entirely blank. I kept my voice level and precise. Blood did not pay for that luxury vehicle, I replied. Fraud did. You made a financial calculation when you drained my account. Now you are experiencing the market correction. Helen recoiled as if she had touched a live wire. Her sobs faltered, replaced by a look of sheer incomprehension. She could not process a reality where I refused to save them. Before she could launch another emotional manipulation, the lead detective stepped onto the walkway. He introduced himself as an investigator with the State Financial Crimes Division. He did not care about suburban social hierarchies or country club reputations. He only cared about the paper trail. The investigator turned his attention to Richard. My father stood near a stone planter, looking like a hollow shell of the man who bragged in the diner 24 hours earlier. The detective read the charges aloud. Corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, falsifying vendor invoices across state lines. The words hung in the warm coastal air, heavy and undeniable. The officer asked Richard to turn around and place his hands behind his back. Richard offered no resistance. The regional finance director submitted to the process with terrifying compliance. The metallic click of the handcuffs snapping shut echoed loudly over the sound of the distant Gulf waves. The polished metal contrasted sharply with the cuffs of his custom-tailored suit. A second officer conducted a standard search, removing the Vanguard Logistics corporate access badge from his pocket. The badge was handed over to the Caldwell security chief. Richard was officially severed from the empire. He would never walk into that corporate headquarters again. As the officers guided my father toward the back seat of the unmarked sedan, a heavy diesel engine roared down the private road. A massive flatbed tow truck pulled through the wrought iron gates, its amber caution lights rotating lazily in the dusk. The rig navigated the circular driveway and reversed toward a separate parking enclave near the side of the property. Tyler snapped out of his daze. He recognized the destination of the flatbed. Earlier in the afternoon, he had convinced a valet to park his newly acquired Range Rover in a highly visible spot, hoping to showcase his status. The tow truck operator lowered the steel ramp and began unwinding the thick winch cable. Tyler sprinted toward the vehicle, waving his arms and shouting commands. He ordered the operator to stop, claiming the vehicle was his private property. He shouted that he needed the car for his new medical sales job. The state detective intercepted my brother, projecting a calm but immovable authority. The investigator explained the mechanics of asset forfeiture. Since the down payment was traced directly to embezzled corporate funds, the SUV was no longer a personal status symbol. It was a primary piece of physical evidence in a felony fraud investigation. Tyler watched the steel hooks attached to the undercarriage of his pristine luxury car. The winch whined, pulling the heavy vehicle up the slanted ramp. The tires squeaked against the metal. Tyler dropped to his knees on the crushed white shells. The young man who laughed at vintage watches and demanded custom suits wailed into his hands. His entire identity was tied to unearned material goods. Stripped of his imported leather and premium horsepower, he possessed nothing of actual substance. The medical sales job would vanish by Monday morning when he failed to arrive. His credit was already ruined. His safety net was currently wearing handcuffs in the back of a police cruiser. The tow truck secured its load and rumbled back down the driveway, taking my brother and his hollow pride with it. The scene near the fountain distilled down to a quiet finality. Richard sat locked inside the police cruiser, staring blankly out the reinforced window. Helen stood near the rear bumper, shivering despite the warm Alabama evening. The reality of her new life was settling over her. No corporate salary, no suburban prestige, just mounting legal fees and public disgrace. I walked down the limestone steps approaching my mother for the final time. I reached into a hidden pocket sewn into the seam of my couture gown. I retrieved a small, square envelope made of thick ivory paper embossed with the Caldwell family crest. I held it out, offering it to the woman who gave birth to me. Helen looked at the pristine paper, her hands shaking as she took it. She wiped a streak of ruined mascara from her cheek. She asked what the envelope contained, her voice reduced to a fragile whisper. I delivered the answer with the clinical detachment of a final audit. "That is the invoice for your 3 plates at the diner last night," I said. "Since you told me I need to be better at budgeting, I decided to start keeping accurate ledgers." Helen stared at the paper, the final thread of her delusion snapping under the weight of the moment. She realized I was not keeping the change. I was sending a message. The era of my silent funding was permanently over. She slowly turned and climbed into the back of a waiting transport vehicle arranged by the authorities. The doors closed, sealing her inside. The unmarked sedans and the transport van pulled away, navigating the circular driveway and heading toward the open gates. I stood alone on the white shells, watching the taillights disappear down the coastal highway. The heavy wrought iron gates swung shut, locking with a deep, resonant thud. I turned around and walked back toward the terrace where my husband and my new future were waiting. The air felt remarkably clean, and for the first time in 28 years, the balance sheet was perfectly clear. 30 days passed since the heavy iron gates of the coastal estate shut out my former relatives. The Alabama summer transitioned from July humidity into the baking heat of August. The dust from the wedding fallout settled, revealing a newly structured landscape. I sat at my home office desk reviewing a certified letter forwarded by the state prosecutor. It contained the preliminary hearing schedule for the man who used to be my father. The corporate termination operated with clinical efficiency. Vanguard Logistics did not offer severance packages to employees caught fabricating vendor invoices. The Human Resources Department invoked a specific malfeasance clause, permanently stripping his accumulated pension. Without his regional finance director's salary, the illusion of his wealth collapsed overnight. Richard now sat in a county holding facility awaiting trial for felony embezzlement. His attorney requested bail, but the magistrate denied the motion, citing the risk of flight given the stolen corporate capital. Local business journals published brief articles outlining the white-collar fraud, exposing his actions to the entire community. The manager, who spent 2 decades kissing the rings of executives, was now taking orders from county guards, eating generic cafeteria food, and wearing a standard-issue uniform. Tyler experienced his own brutal market correction. Deprived of his stolen automotive status symbol, he failed to attend the orientation for his medical sales position. The firm rescinded the job offer by Wednesday, citing unprofessional conduct. Without Richard generating fraudulent capital to float his living expenses, my brother defaulted on his high-rise lease. The property management company executed a swift eviction, placing his imported furniture on the public sidewalk. I received a brief text from a former neighbor mentioning his current reality. Tyler now worked the drive-through window at a local fast food franchise to pay off his mounting legal retainers. The young man who mocked vintage watches and demanded custom suits now wore a polyester uniform smelling of fried oil and regret. He spent his shifts handing paper bags to passing commuters earning minimum wage while learning the actual value of $1. The hands that once gripped the steering wheel of a luxury vehicle now gripped a mop handle at closing time. Helen suffered a different kind of poverty. Her downfall was strictly social. The suburban country club where she spent her afternoons gossiping and charging expensive lunches to a credit card revoked her membership due to unpaid dues. The neighborhood wives she considered her elite circle stopped answering her calls. They recognized the toxicity of a federal fraud investigation and severed ties to protect their own reputations. Helen downsized to a cramped one-bedroom apartment situated over a loud retail strip mall. She spent her days sitting in a small living room surrounded by boxed-up designer handbags she could no longer afford to carry anywhere. Her phone never rang. She was exiled from the kingdom she tried to rule, left alone with the echoes of her past arrogance. I did not revel in their misery. The supply chain manager inside me simply recognized that a defective system had been successfully dismantled. Actions generated consequences. The ledger balanced itself. Following the wedding, Harrison Caldwell invited me into his coastal study. He poured 2 glasses of sparkling water and slid a leather binder across his mahogany desk. It contained an offer for a senior vice president role within the Vanguard corporate structure. He cited my forensic accounting skills and my ability to navigate high-pressure crises without yielding. The salary figure printed on the page was staggering, representing a direct path to the executive board. I looked at the billionaire who treated me like a true daughter. I thanked him for the opportunity and gently pushed the binder back across the polished wood. I explained my reasoning. Taking a position at his firm would invite whispers of nepotism. It would echo the same unearned entitlement my brother displayed. I needed to build my own foundation, using my own merits. Harrison smiled, nodding with deep approval. He understood the value of conquering your own territory. Instead, I leveraged my updated resume and accepted a director-level position at a rival global freight firm based out of Mobile. The role demanded grueling hours and complex problem-solving, but the authority belonged strictly to me. I negotiated my own compensation package, securing stock options and a dedicated logistics team. I managed international shipping routes, predicting market fluctuations and preventing supply blockages. I walked into the glass lobby on my first day, wearing a tailored suit purchased with my own capital, holding my head high. Julian finalized his ground floor rotations at Vanguard. Having mastered the supply routes and warehouse operations, he officially stepped into an executive management role. He traded his faded flannel shirts for tailored charcoal suits, but his core demeanor never changed. He remained the quiet, analytical observer who watched my family dig their own graves in a rundown diner. We operated as equals, 2 professionals building a shared legacy on honesty and ironclad boundaries. I closed the legal folder containing the court dates for Richard and set it aside. I walked out onto the private balcony of the home Julian and I recently purchased. It was not a sprawling coastal estate, but it featured a wide view of the Gulf and a quiet wraparound porch catching the evening breeze. Julian sat at an outdoor table reviewing our joint investment portfolios on a digital tablet. The glow of the screen illuminated his face. He looked up as I approached, pulling out a chair for me. He handed me a glass of iced tea. Ice clinked against the crystal, a sound that once signaled the start of an argument in a suffocating suburban kitchen. Now, it simply meant the end of a productive workday. We spent an hour analyzing municipal bonds and global shipping indices. We discussed future acquisitions and quarterly projections. There were no hidden accounts. There were no secret loans or unearned demands. We communicated with transparent precision, treating our marriage like a bulletproof partnership. I leaned back against the patio chair, looking out at the darkening water. The horizon faded into a deep indigo. I thought about that humid July afternoon when my mother casually announced my wedding fund was gone. She treated my financial security like a disposable resource, expecting me to quietly accept the loss. My parents believed they were stripping me of my future when they stole those $20,000. They thought they were elevating their favorite child by sacrificing my stability. They failed to calculate the true cost of their transaction. The money they seized did not buy them elite status. It bought their own destruction. The theft served as the ultimate catalyst, exposing their corporate fraud and shattering their suburban illusions. It removed the blinders, granting me the clarity to walk away without a single ounce of guilt. By forcing me to cancel a modest venue and endure their casual cruelty, they inadvertently handed me the keys to a life they could never fathom. They introduced me to a father-in-law who recognized my worth. They solidified my partnership with a man who possessed the power to break them, but waited patiently for them to break themselves. I took a slow sip of my tea, enjoying the cool liquid and the profound silence of our home. For 28 years, I carried the weight of their debts, their expectations, and their constant selfish demands. Now I carried nothing but my own potential. I had finally stopped paying for their mistakes. The transaction was officially complete, and for the first time in my life, the balance sheet was perfectly clear. Sitting on this balcony watching the Gulf water turn pitch black under the night sky, I realized that the theft of my wedding fund was the greatest gift my family ever gave me. It forced me to stop fixing their broken systems and start building my own. Looking back at the wreckage they left behind, I see exactly how the mechanics of betrayal and entitlement operate. Surviving that extraction taught me more about human nature than years of corporate management ever could. I want to share the 5 immutable laws I learned from watching my family orchestrate their own downfall. First blood does not entitle anyone to your peace or your bank account. Shared DNA is a simple biological fact, but loyalty is a behavioral choice earned through mutual respect. I spent years acting as a financial shield for people who viewed me as a disposable asset, until I finally cut the cord. Second, silence is a highly effective tactical weapon. When arrogant people are deprived of an emotional reaction, they tend to overplay their hands. My refusal to scream or cry blinded my parents to the trap closing around them, allowing them to walk straight into their ruin. Third, never compromise your own foundation to finance the ego of someone else. My father sacrificed his freedom, his pension, and his legacy just to purchase a temporary status symbol for a son who refused to work. A facade built on stolen capital will inevitably collapse under the weight of the truth. Fourth, true power does not need to broadcast itself. Harrison Caldwell owned a global shipping empire, but wore plain linen, while my brother demanded custom designer logos to hide his profound insecurities. Real authority walks quietly, while fake wealth screams for attention. Fifth, and most importantly, absolute severance is the ultimate justice. You do not need to seek revenge against toxic individuals who drain your resources. You simply need to establish ironclad boundaries, step out of the way, and allow them to face the natural consequences of their own actions. I did not destroy my family. I merely stopped preventing their self-destruction. My ledger is clean, and my future belongs entirely to me. I built a life where every asset is earned and every relationship is grounded in truth. Thank you for listening to my journey on Ava Tells Stories. If you found value in these lessons and relate to the struggle of breaking free from toxic dynamics, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to walk away from entitled relatives to protect your own future? Let me know your experiences and how you found your own freedom. I read every single comment. Until next time, remember to guard your boundaries fiercely and never let anyone charge their mistakes to your account.